Assalamu alaikum, girls. Today the lecture is going to be about the components of food and environmental hazards of which we have left. But in our previous lecture, we discussed about this nutrition. We talked about autotrophic and heterotrophic animals, and we have discussed macronutrients and micronutrients. What is their role in plant life? All these micronutrients. We also discussed role of nitrogen and role of magnesium in plants. Today I'm going to teach importance of fertilizers, organic and inorganic fertilizers, environmental hazards related to fertilizers use, and then we will discuss components of food. We will discuss carbohydrates, lipids, and proteins. Right? Let's discuss the topic, which is importance of fertilizers. With the passage of time, when human was learning different things in history, human cultivated plants. And during that cultivation process, human learned that addition of certain materials to soil results in desirable characteristics in plants. And such materials which were added were called as fertilizers. The material which bring desirable characteristics in plants were called as fertilizers. And what were the desirable characteristics? Like having more fruits or increased annual yield or more good, you can like good seeds production. All these desirable characteristics were attributed to the addition of certain materials, which later on they call them as fertilizers. Because initially the fertilizers were all natural, whether it were organic or inorganic, everything was natural. But nowadays we add artificial fertilizers. But there are two major categories of fertilizers: organic fertilizers and inorganic fertilizers. Talking about organic fertilizers, as you might have studied in chemistry about organic and inorganic term. If I recall, organic means the compounds made up of carbon element. I mean, there's a diversity of compound made from carbon only. So these organic fertilizers are mainly derived from plants and animal materials. They are more complex and take more time to break down and be available for plants. When as they are complex, they have complex structure and complex variety, they take time to be available for plants. And the examples are manure and compost. Compost का अक्सर हम सुनते हैं कि when we separate garbage, not we but in Western world they do they separate glass waste, metal waste, and compost. That compost is coming from dead remains of plants and animals. Dead remains of plants and animals. They act as fertilizers in villages. We have seen how they put that dead remains in a field, open field, and use that as fertilizers. जिसको थप्पियां भी वो कहते हैं कि वो animal dung होता है, which is manure. Remember हमारे villages में animal dung is used as थप्पियां और वो दीवारों पर लगा लगा के use करते हैं as fertilizers later on. That is basically manure. They are used as organic fertilizers. They can also increase soil drainage, aeration, and the ability of the soil to hold nutrients. Oh, now what is soil drainage? Soil drainage means, I'm just looking at the time. Okay, soil drainage means that the organic fertilizers are increasing the ability of the soil to drain water or nutrients to the base of soil, and it is increasing the capacity of the soil to drain things. It's not making it infertile, which becomes hard and doesn't let anything to pass through it. It also increases aeration. Fertile soil has more air as compared to infertile soil, so organic fertilizers are increasing the air in soil to make it more fertile, right? So it also increases the ability of the soil to hold nutrients. I mean, it must be an infertile soil which cannot hold nutrients, while the fertilizers, organic fertilizers, are increasing the ability of the soil to hold nutrients, right? So this is all about organic fertilizers. If I talk about inorganic fertilizers, they are inorganic in nature, include rock phosphate, elemental sulfur, and gypsum. When I say inorganic nature, means the compounds other than carbon, and it is full of, the whole periodic table is other than carbon, which means the rest of the elements. But we know from the first chapter there are only 96 elements which exist in nature. So rest of them are synthesized in lab. So inorganic fertilizers, one of them is rock phosphate, elemental sulfur, and gypsum. But we can also create artificial fertilizers, which mostly have nitrogen in them. Um, acha, if nitrogen is the main element in a fertilizer, we will call it as a nitrogen fertilizer. One main thing about inorganic fertilizers is that they are easily dissolvable in water. They are easily available because पानी में quickly dissolve हो जाते हैं, और पानी is readily available to soil and to plants, तो ये quickly absorb होते हैं. Because plant will take these nutrients through xylem tissues with the help of water. So that availability of inorganic fertilizers is quick as compared to organic fertilizers. If we move on to the next slide, environmental hazards related to fertilizers use. Mhm. The massive quantities of inorganic fertilizers affect the soil nutrient holding capacity. Their high solubilities also degrade ecosystems through eutrophication. Acha. What happens if when we use inorganic fertilizers excessively and we do not keep in check, it's going to be absorbed in excessive amount and it will affect the soil nutrient holding capacity. It's going to drain into the water and then will go into the ecosystem, into the environment, and as a result it's going to damage the environment. Let me tell you how. When you are taking more nutrients, more inorganic fertilizers than required, it will be drained from the soil into the water bodies, which will pollute the surrounding bodies. If you look at this diagram, look at the forested area where the water body is oxygen rich. But here where there are industries in the city, polluted water is entering into the water, and sewage is also entering into the water stream. Industrial pollution, which contains phosphorus, nitrogen, metals, are entering into the water. Plus agriculture may the inorganic fertilizers are leaching into the environment. Now these, if I talk only about inorganic fertilizers, when it enters into the water body, it causes depletion of oxygen, and because of these chemicals in the water, alga blooms excessively. यानी algae जो green color की होती है, it grows too excessively, which is called as algal bloom. So the whole top of water will be covered with algae. I mean, must have seen water bodies where the whole water body is covered with algae. What happens जब top पूरी algae से covered है, तो sunlight doesn't penetrate at the bottom of the water bodies. Because of that, it damages aquatic plants, other plants, and it also disturbs whole aquatic life. And this phenomena is called as eutrophication because it is happening because of increase in chemical nutrients in an ecosystem. Increase in chemical nutrients in an ecosystem is called as eutrophication. And you are going to discuss this topic in 10th class. वहाँ पर mostly algal bloom का जिक्र है, and I'm discussing it over here as well to clarify the concept. Now this question can be asked in exam, what is eutrophication and things like that. And it is also taught in 10th class with more emphasis on algal bloom and all that. So you have to use these fertilizers in a limited amount and you have to keep a check on it. Storage and application of some nitrogen fertilizers may cause emission of greenhouse gas nitrous oxide. Now there is another negative effect is that these nitrogen fertilizers release nitrous oxide. And you know what is greenhouse effect? This greenhouse gas is going to affect our globe, and you know that which it increases global warming. I have taught it to you earlier. Maybe where I have taught you greenhouse effect. I don't remember, or maybe I'll teach you in the next classes. Greenhouse effect कहाँ पढ़ा है हमने? Third chapter में? Second, third, fourth. Whatever. The greenhouse effect, you have studied it in previous classes as well, and even in park studies, that these gases actually increase the annual temperature. And I have told you, I have made the diagram where I told you that how these gases interact UV light, and it increases annual temperature, and because of that polar caps and uh, um, the glaciers in the northern area or all over the globe are melting and resulting into the flooding or damaging. Maybe sometimes it is also leading to drought and things like that. This is what a greenhouse effect is. So we have to avoid using these uh, excessive fertilizers which emit greenhouse gases or any kind of pollutant. But यहाँ पर we are talking about fertilizers, so we should limit ourselves to that. Ammonia gas may be emitted from the inorganic fertilizers, and this extra ammonia can increase soil acidity. Now, making a soil acidic is also not good for crops. I mean, your soil, I think so, I've read it somewhere, that the pH of the soil should not exceed more than 6.5 or 6.7. मतलब न्यूट्रल के करीब करीब होती है पीएच आइडियल pH for the soil. I'm not 100% sure, but when you are going to add ammonia, it's going to increase soil acidity, which is not good for plants. Excessive nitrogen fertilizer can lead to pest problems by increasing their reproduction rate. Achha, another bad effect is that if you're going to use more nitrogen fertilizers, it increases pest problem. Now, what is pest? Any kind of insects which damage your crops, food, or such kind of sources. आपकी crops को damage कर रहे हो, your food को, storage facility को, and your domestic animals are called as pest. So when you are taking nitrogen fertilizers in excess, it increases their reproduction rate. जैसे आजकल हमारा टिड्डी दल का हमला है, what you call it in English? I forgot the name of टिड्डी दल. locust attack in Pakistan started from Africa and different other countries. So this is not, I'm not saying it is only because of nitrogen, but one of the reason is that these nitrogen fertilizers also increase stress in our environment. So let's see what is next. For these reasons, what biologists recommend is that you have to control the nutrient content of the soil and nutrient requirement of the crop. Both these things should be calculated before the application of fertilizers. I mean, how much nutrients are available in the soil, you have to calculate it by giving that sample to the labs कि आपकी जो soil है उसमें कितने nutrients हैं, and the crop you are going to cultivate, whether it's gandum or kapas or any kind of crop uh, in, you are going to cultivate in your soil, you have to see how much nutrients are in your soil and how much that crop demands, how much nutrients that crop demands. According to that, you're going to calculate and then you're going to apply inorganic fertilizers just to avoid the bad effects of these fertilizers. Excessive amount of organic fertilizers cause environmental problems due to nitrate leaching or runoff of soluble organic compounds. What is nitrate leaching? Leaching is also like draining of that fertilizers into the water bodies. Nitrate, remember, these are very important radicals, or nitrate salts भी कह सकते हैं, like sodium nitrate, potassium nitrate, calcium nitrate or magnesium nitrate, whatever. These nitrates are required by plants. So when you are going to incorporate by adding organic fertilizers, the excessive amount is going to leach, which is like draining from the soil into water bodies or becoming a soluble organic compound, which has also bad effects on the environment, like it causes eutrophication and other bad effects are evident in our society and in our entire world. Okay, so we should keep a check on their how much amount we are adding to the crops and how much we require. It should be checked by every person at a lower level or at a higher level of cultivation. We should keep on checking these nutrients, these fertilizers. So this is all about fertilizers. Let's talk about components of human food. We have studied it in our previous classes, and we know it in general that our food comprises of carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, minerals, vitamins. Everything is essential for human because the nutritional requirement of human and other animals are relatively complex as compared to plants. We need carbohydrates and that different kind of sources, like look at this, different kind of carbohydrates. We need different sources of protein, we need fat, we need healthy fats. All these nutrients are essential. Let's talk about them one by one. Carbohydrates. I haven't mentioned in these slides what carbohydrate stands for, but let me tell you first. Carbo is the word for carbon, and hydra is coming from water, H2O. It's also not mentioned in your book, but listen carefully that carbohydrates, as the name shows, consists of carbon and hydra, carbon H2O. And if you are going to check most of the carbohydrates, they follow this ratio of C, H2. C is 1 and H, hydrogen is 2 and oxygen is also 1. 1 into 2 into 1 ratio. यानी कि कार्बन की और हाइड्रोजन और ऑक्सीजन की रेशियो कैसे होगी? I'm sorry, I haven't added this point in the slide. लेकिन आप just understand, I'm saying carbohydrates are made up of C, carbon, hydrogen and oxygen, and the ratio is 1 into 2 into 1, mostly in carbohydrates. Like let's take an example of glucose. Glucose has C6H12O6 formula, And if we simplify the ratio, C6H12O6 is 2, it becomes C1H2, 1 into 2 into 1. Like carbon में 6 है, तो hydrogen में 12 है. It's becoming 1 into 2. And oxygen is also 6. So 1 into 2 into 1. So mostly in carbohydrates, the ratio is 1 into 2 into 1. Okay? It's a basic source of energy for all of living organisms, and it is uh, required in abundant amount. I mean, mostly we eat carbohydrates whenever we eat, and it is the staple food worldwide is carbohydrate. If you look at the staple food means daily जो food खाई जा रही हो, यानी कि वो आपकी डेली की डिमांड में मौजूद है. जैसे हमारे यहाँ रोटी है. In our sources of carbohydrate, we eat mostly roti. And in Western world, they use buns. Look at these buns and bread. Different form of breads are used. Turkish drama में भी आपने देखा होगा कि their buns are different. And in England and such kind of European countries, Italy and such kind of countries, their staple food is pasta. Italy में especially. But in England, the staple food is mostly potatoes. Am I right? As a source of carbohydrate, they mostly use potato. Italy use pasta, and rest of the other countries use buns, bread, basically different form of bread. Our bread is different. And in Bangladesh, we know that there are certain countries other than Bangladesh too who eat rice as a staple food. So carbohydrate is mainly a basic source of energy, and it is 2/3 of our total calories. यानी कि daily what we consume carbohydrates in amount of 2/3 of total calories. Even it is required in balanced diet. 2/3 of our total calories comprise of carbohydrates. But when you become fat, you try to skip your carbohydrates during dieting and in keto diet or different kind of diets, avoid carbs. But there are certain diets which say eat a balanced amount of food, do not skip carbs altogether. But in when you want to avoid calories, then sometimes you don't eat carbs. But in balanced diet, there's a major component of there is a major component of food assigned to carbohydrates. Let's take an example. Glucose is the most often example of carbohydrates. It's found in mostly we get energy from glucose. I mean, our food is converted into glucose, and glucose is the primary source to provide energy. Then another example of carbohydrates are maltose, lactose, sucrose, and starch. Actually, starch is a polymer. In case of carbohydrates, polymer is called as polysaccharide, or glucose is a monomer. So in case of carbohydrate, monomer is called as monosaccharide, while maltose, lactose, and sucrose are dimer. अच्छा मैं दोबारा कहती हूँ. एक होता है जर्नल वर्ड होता है बायो में. मोनोमर means single basic unit of something. Dimer means two major units of something. And polymer means a long chain compound. I've told you many times, poly means many, mer means units. Again, ये वाला point भी मैंने add नहीं किया because it's not mentioned in your course. But you can add it somewhere as a general knowledge that monomer in carbohydrates is called as monosaccharide. Dimer is called as disaccharide. Polymer is called as polysaccharide. So the example of polysaccharide is starch. Disaccharide is over here. Over here is maltose, lactose, and sucrose. And monomer, the most famous monomer is glucose, right? These are different structures of carbohydrates. And the energy obtained from 1 gram of carbohydrate is 4 kilocalories. Okay? The sources are, look at this, आप कितने easily याद कर सकते हैं कि these buns or breads, pasta, bran, यानी जो खुश्क सा होता है, खुश्का क्या कहते हैं उसको, जो गंदम से छानी छान बुरा हम निकाल देते हैं ना, उसको ब्रैन कहेंगे. वो that is also a good source of carbohydrate, complex carbohydrates. Beans, potatoes, cereal, rice, all of these are sources of carbohydrates which we get. These are the sources which provide carbohydrate to us. Okay. So this is all about carbohydrate. Girls, you can also easily learn this topic by dividing it into these headings: basic source, daily consumption, examples, energy obtained, sources. Okay, so you have to divide the topic into these different subheadings according to my slide. You can easily learn it, and just keep these diagrams in your mind to remember the sources of food, sources of carbohydrate. You can easily learn it. Okay, so let's talk about another component of food, which is lipids, and in common language we call it as fats. Okay, lipids are also essential component of our food, but mostly we avoid it to just to avoid being obese. But you have to take everything in a balanced amount. It's not good to avoid certain component of food altogether, but it is also not good to take only one kind of food. Like if you're going to eat fatty food in excess, you are likely to become obese. I have told it to you in the topic of malnutrition, which I taught you earlier. Malnutrition is just not taking one form of diet. It is also a kind of thing where you are taking food excessively. So, what is a composition of lipid? It consists of fatty acids bonded to glycerol. Mostly lipids are fatty acids bonded to glycerol. Let's look at the next diagram. Just to tell you, look at this diagram. Three different fatty acids, which is basically alkyl carboxylic acid. Alkyl group can be anything, but there are three different fatty acids bonding with glycerol becomes triglyceride. This is an example of a fatty acid. It is formed by the combination of, oh sorry, this is an example of a lipid, which is formed by the combination of fatty acid and glycerol. Three different fatty acid chains are making bond with glycerol to become a fat. Okay, so they are composed of fatty acids and glycerol. How many types of lipids are there? Saturated fatty acids and unsaturated fatty acids. First of all, I must tell you what is a saturated fatty acid and an unsaturated fatty acid. Saturated fatty acid is the one where carbon atoms are making bond with hydrogen only. There are 4 single bonds which carbon is making. You have studied in chemistry that carbon can make only 4 bonds. If all of these bonds are single covalent bonds with hydrogen atom, then it's a, or all of them are single covalent bonds, whether it's with another carbon atom, it is called as saturated fatty acid. While what is an unsaturated fatty acid? An unsaturated fatty acid is the one which has double covalent bond or triple covalent bond between carbon atoms. Not in all carbon. Somewhere in the structure it has few double covalent bonds or triple covalent bonds, which makes it unsaturated fatty acid. And I must tell you, saturated fatty acids are mostly solid at room temperature, and unsaturated fatty acids are oil at room temperature. These double bonds are making them like a liquid at room temperature. Okay, what we have studied earlier, the more the fats are unsaturated, the more they are good for our health. And the more they are saturated, they are not good for our health. Like the oils, unsaturated fatty acids are mostly oils, okay? Like canola oil, sunflower oil, olive oil, castor oil, castor oil, coconut oil, which is semi-solid. all these mustard oil, these are the examples of unsaturated fatty acids. And if I talk about saturated fatty acid, butter, ghee, such kind of fatty acids which solidify at room temperature are called as saturated fatty acids. If we consider butter as an example, butter has 70% saturated fats. Yeah, sorry, the diagram is covering the word. And 30% unsaturated fats. ज़्यादा saturated है, इसलिए butter is solid at room temperature. If you look at the example of sunflower oil, again यहाँ पे मैंने cover कर दिया. 75% of it is unsaturated fatty acid. 75% is unsaturated, and rest of the 25% is saturated. That's why sunflower is the oil at room temperature, because it has unsaturated fatty acids in abundance. So it's an oil, while butter has saturated fats more than unsaturated. इसीलिए butter is semi-solid or solid at room temperature. So whatever our knowledge is that unsaturated fatty acids are good for health, like olive oil, canola oil, mustard oil, and the other oil, sunflower oil. But mostly we hear name is of olive oil. But these days, what I'm listening from different nutritionists is that you cannot avoid saturated fatty acid altogether. Like I have heard many doctors who are calling desi ghee as one of the good fats. They are not saying कि वो बनास्पति घी खाएं जो हमें मिल रहा है, but the desi ghee, they say, like they pronounce it as desi ghee, and they mostly recommend grass-fed ghee. Grass-fed ghee means the cows are only feeding at grass, and they're not taking any artificial thing, any artificial source from environment. Rather, they are only feeding on grass. So the grass-fed cows, the grass-fed desi ghee is a very good source of nutrient. They are recommending it to us. अच्छा हमारे मुल्क में if we even go for grass-fed cows and grass-fed desi ghee, our cows are, people in our country are mainly injecting them with oxytocin injections, or I don't know, they are using different injections, which is not healthy for us, because oxytocin is a hormone which makes, which increases the production of milk. But if you're going to ask some living organism to produce milk more than its demand, तो वो calcium bones में से आना शुरू हो जाएगा. That will weaken the bones of that animal, and it is going to ultimately damage the animal. We are going to feed on the meat of that animal. Is not good for health. But I don't know why we cannot stop our society to stop using these injections at excessive level, right? This is why that ghee also becomes somehow negative. But desi ghee has benefits. We cannot avoid it altogether. And among oil, olive oil and mustard oil are very good for health. Even the semi-solid coconut oil is also very good for skin and things like that. Okay. What are the sources of lipid in our diet? Milk, butter, cheese. अच्छा ये सिर्फ चीज वगैरह जो है, एग्स प्रोटीन में भी आएंगे, because they are good sources of proteins, lipids and even, ठीक है, सिर्फ एक चीज में rich नहीं है. And meat, especially meat आपका प्रोटीन में भी आएगा, like mutton and beef are also good source of lipids. Mustard seed and these dry fruits are also a good source of lipids, good fats. Dry fruit is not only the source of fats, it is also a source of different vitamins and minerals, but it is also a good source of fats too. right? Even milk doesn't have fats. Milk is a rich source of proteins and vitamins too. So remember, but I'll tell you here especially why we say bread as a source of carbohydrate. It can have a little bit of fats and a little bit of protein too. But the thing is that the major component in them is of carbs. So we call it as a source of carbohydrate. Bread, pasta, beans. Beans are actually a good source of proteins too, but it is also a good source of carbohydrate. Let me see. Hmm. Yes, beans is a good source of carbohydrate too, but it's a good source of proteins too. Potato doesn't only have carbohydrate, but the major source in it is of carbs. अच्छा हम बोलने में कार्बोहाइड्रेट को carbs कह सकते हैं, but not in writing. अच्छा, look at these cereals. Cereals can have other thing as well, but the major source is of carbs, and rice especially. Okay, these are the rich sources of carbs. But if we talk about milk is a source of protein too, and eggs are also source of protein plus fats. So is the case with protein and this mutton, chicken, and beef. Mutton and chicken and beef are good sources of fats plus protein. The mustard and these obviously dry fruits, it doesn't only it is not only a source of fats, it is also a source of vitamins and different minerals. Okay, so let's move to the next point. Mm, Usage of lipids. Lipids are found in membranes, the sheets surrounding neurons, and certain hormones. We haven't studied hormones yet, but hormones are different chemicals performing different specified functions. Like you might have heard of insulin, thyroxine hormone. Yeah, इस तरह से आपने नाम सुने में. They do certain functions which we will study in 10th class. But these lipids are present in our sheets, any layer which is surrounding the bundles of neuron. That sheet is made up of fats, acting as a insulator. न्यूरॉन्स में करंट भी जनरेट होता है ना, तो उस करंट को लीक करने से बचाने के लिए या उस जनरेशन को ओवरऑल न्यूरॉन्स को प्रोटेक्ट करने के लिए there is a fat sheath, and membranes are also made up of fats, the lipid bilayer in fluid mosaic model, right? So let's talk about excessive intake of saturated fatty acids. If you are going to take solid fats in excessive amount, it's not good for us. It's going to increase the person's cholesterol level, and the increased cholesterol level can lead to clogging of arteries and ultimately can lead to heart diseases. Clogging of arteries means blockage हो सकता है arteries में. Maybe the artery of heart can lead to heart attack. If the arteries are going to clog, it can also lead to vascular problems. यानी कि आपकी arteries का veins का problem हो सकते हैं कि blood flow नहीं करेगा, उस organ में दर्द होएगा या वो organ damage होना शुरू हो जाएगा. तो if it is going to clog the arteries of heart, it can lead to heart diseases. So we should take saturated fatty acids in balanced amount. We have to check the amount of fats. We cannot alleviate levels of cholesterol. Okay, let me tell you how much energy we get from 1 gram of lipids. 1 gram of fats is providing us 9 kilocalories, almost double than the source of carbohydrate and proteins. यानी कि protein भी 1 gram is providing 4 kilocalories. Carbohydrate is also providing 4 kilocalories per gram. But fats are providing more than double, 9 kilocalories per gram. That's why in a balanced diet, the amount of fats is taken in very less amount. Haven't I seen you pyramids in the previous lecture जहाँ पे fat की amount बहुत थोड़ी है as compared to the amount of carbohydrates and proteins. We should take fats in less amount, very less amount, okay? Because the calories they provide is more than double. तो फैट लेने ज़रूरी है बट इन लेस अमाउंट. Everything we have to eat but in the balanced way. So this is all about fats. Let's talk about proteins. Or shall we stop our lecture because it's 40 minutes are exceeding. It's exceeding beyond 40 minutes. I will talk about proteins कि उनकी composition क्या है, what is their vital structure component, proteins का role क्या है. You can study it on your own as well. Okay, what are the sources of proteins? So we will discuss it in the next class. Kindly ask me questions if you have some problem in that. Okay, and I will also maybe share you the pyramids of balanced diet, which I have shown in malnutrition topic 2, but I will show it here as well. Okay, inshallah, in the next lecture. Allah Hafiz for now, and ask me question on WhatsApp. I'll be obliged. Allah